you pick up where you. And I think Iranian
Yes.
cinema, I'm hoping somebody will do Iranian cinema. This is a wonderful format, by the way, guys. Geeta and Nikhila.
Yeah.
Yay, you managed to sustain this
Uh-huh.
wonderful place. And hopefully,
Yes.
Thank
what
you.
do you do,
Yes.
Aveek?
Well, I was trained in literature, and I taught literature. And then I came back, I was in England, and then I came back and I worked for the Telegraph for a couple of decades.
Shall we
And
start?
then,
Oh, sorry. Shall we start, Nikhila?
Yeah, we can start. I've gone live on Facebook. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. Okay.
yes, and then I
I'll do the
gave up my
introduction.
job.
Abhik, I'm going
Yes.
to introduce you shortly.
Okay. Okay. Well, then, Pravina, you will get your answer.
Yeah.
or the formal answer from Geeta.
Hi, everybody,
Yes.
and welcome to yet another session of Talking Films Online. A very happy new year to everybody. And today we have with us Aveek Sen, who's going to be leading the discussion of Night Porter. I think it's one of the most polarizing films ever. So I think it will be an interesting discussion. Aveek Sen is a freelance writer and teacher who lives in Calcutta. His work combines literature, art, cinema, music, and everyday life. His most recent publication is Art and Life, 21 Essays. He was associate editor of the Telegraph, Calcutta, and lecturer in English at St. Hilda's College, Oxford. He was given the 29 Infinity Award for writing on photography by the International Center of Photography, New York, and read English literature at University College, Oxford, as a Rhodes Scholar and at Jadavpur University, Calcutta. Welcome, Aveek, to our session, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Geeta. Well, I have really put together a kind of shuffle of different things. And I don't really have a very formal presentation on the Night Porter, which I remember being introduced to the film in the early 90s when I was a student and I was in the cinema. And since then it's had a kind of almost compulsive hold on me, and I have kept. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yes, and I've kept coming back to it, teaching it, discussing it, and then towards the middle of the 90s, I had the good fortune of getting to know both Liliana Cavani and Charlotte Rampling, and I've really cherished some interesting conversations with them as well about the film and about acting in it and directing it. So it's been a long relationship with a difficult, troubling, and yet extremely compelling film. And needless to say, I suppose it's pretty evident that I'm a great fan of a lot of the work that Charlotte Rampling has done, and in a way opened up in the cinema, both with directors like Visconti and Lars von Trier, and particularly with this film, The Night Porter by Cavani. I just thought that it would be good to do a very short and rather scrappy introduction to Liliana Cavani. She was born in 1933 and was perhaps in her time the only woman student of direction in the national, graduating from Italy's National Film School in Rome. And her early work in the 1960s was in documentary films. She did a history of the Third Reich, 1961-62, and Women of the Resistance, 1965. And in fact, I have shared with you the link to this documentary, which is on YouTube, and which is also part of the the additional material that Criterion provides with this film, with The Night Porter. And then she actually moved from documentary filmmaking to a very interesting, largely uncategorizable genre of filmmaking, which was somewhere between documentary and fiction. She made a series of films on St. Francis of Assisi, on Galileo, on Einstein, all of which got into some sort of problem either with the church or the state in Italy, and with certain schools of critics as well. With The Night Porter, I think for me, it's very interesting to actually watch this film alongside the documentary that she made on women of the resistance, and thereby also to think of the relationship between documentary filmmaking and feature filmmaking. What is it that you cannot, as it were, open up in a documentary film, which you then take the license of opening up in a feature film? And she says, Cavani says that when she was interviewing women in the 60s who had been part of the resistance, and not all of them were Jewish women, many of them were non-Jewish, all of them were white women, Italian women. She was very struck by what she was told by a couple of these women who said, who were of course taken into, I think, either Belsen or Dachau or Auschwitz, and survived being in the camps, but who afterwards, after the war, felt this compulsive need every year to visit the camps. And one of them actually did have a relationship with one of her executioners, well, I shouldn't say executioners, one of the officers in the camp, and which she repeatedly described as a relationship of love. And she would actually go back to Dachau every year and put a rose on the grave of this man. And so for Cavani, it was very interesting to actually use cinema to open up into a kind of representation of what she felt was truly and profoundly, unsettlingly incalculable in the kind of the erotic terrain of fascism, and that, in fact, is what interests me very much about this film. The other aspect of the film, which I find very interesting and which opens up again to another host of, another cluster of films which I watch and often teach alongside, is this whole notion of the relationship between a kind of psychoanalytic exploration of fascism with thinking through a history of music and culture and art and ballet and photography and indeed of cinema. And for those of you who've watched this film, you will see that Charlotte Rampling, Lucia's husband, is a conductor. And I do not think that it is at all an accident that the opera that he is in Vienna to conduct in the mid-50s is Mozart's The Magic Flute, which was a Singspiel, a German Singspiel, which Mozart had written towards the end of the 18th century, and which became a kind of canonical work of German folk art. And if you now think of the sequences that are shown in flashback, and most of them set in a camp, with this music from the magic flute, you begin to actually see how calculated Cavani's use of that particular opera and portions of that opera is, because a great deal of that opera is about, it's not just about love, but it is also about the relationship between music and power. And this is something that interests me very much, particularly in the history of post-romantic into modernist music in Europe, following right from Bach and Beethoven, and Vienna, therefore, as a city, becomes a very interesting setting, not just from the point of view of the political history that forms the context to the film, but also a kind of opening up of a way of thinking about music itself, which we find later on in directors like Mikhail Haneke. I'm thinking of a film like The Piano Teacher, and even a film like Ingmar Bergman's Autumn Sonata. So these are some of the things that interest me very deeply about The Night Porter. And the other aspect of The Night Porter, which fascinates me, and I actually use the word fascinate quite deliberately, because I think there is almost a kind of lateral etymological link between fascination and fascism, going back to this whole idea of bewitchment, and of being cast a spell, and it gives us a way of thinking about the relationship between fascism, cinema, and the camera, and indeed of photography, which is, I think, very interestingly explored by people like Cavani and her predecessors, immediate predecessors like Visconti, for instance, and someone like Pasolini, particularly in that other extremely troubling, powerful film, Salo, which I wondered whether I might suggest that. And then I thought, no, it would be more interesting to actually present and have a discussion on The Night Porter. What I really want to finish my introductory sort of opening up of the discussion with is that, when in 2019, Charlotte Rampling was given the honorary Golden Bear in Berlin, she chose to show The Night Porter as part of the homage showing in the city. And this is also, and she did a kind of long televised and recorded interview about her entire career, and which I have also sent you with the links, and which you can watch and listen to on YouTube. And it's very interesting for me how both Dirk Bogarde and Charlotte Rampling actually insist on two things. One, on actually claiming the film for themselves, and saying that this is a film that has been absolutely at the core of their careers as actors. And in fact, Charlotte Rampling even goes on to say that when she was making this film, she wasn't really acting. She was in some way embodying what she calls the essence of being. And they both say that they diverge from Cavani's initial plan of the film which was going to be more about Nazi guilt, which is going to be more unambiguously about this whole question of working through the past. And both Dirk Bogarde and Charlotte Rampling, who had just acted in Visconti's The Damned, and they had met on the sets of The Damned and acted together there, which was also about a fascist family. And it was actually Dirk Bogarde who brought Charlotte Rampling into the production of this film, insisting that he would play this role of the night porter only if Charlotte, his friend by that time, agreed to act as Lucia. And both of them, for them, and this is where they diverge from Liliana Cavani's, well, not completely diverge, but they take the interpretation of the roles in their own hands and say, and they insist on calling it a love story. And I just want to read out to you, for those who haven't perhaps watched this interview, what Charlotte Rampling says about the role of Lucia and about having been in the film. She says, "Was it love?" And I could say, yes, I wouldn't have done it if it wasn't as powerful, as huge, as undeniably there as some form of love. To me, the film is symbolic of who I am in the cinema. It is very much the film that has led me, as Lucia is led by her Max, into that particular world, which is a world of absolute, to me. And then she falters a bit and then she says, you can't avoid what is going to have to happen to you. And there is something very powerful about that. And it keeps coming back to me. And if Night Porter is still powerful, it is a film about something that is very important as to what you as a human being can read into it. This is about as strong as something I think. This is about as strong as something I think as any kind of relationship could be. It might be strange, perverse, weird, dirty, but it's there. And this is something that really interests me about this film, because it introduces a whole kind of meta cinematic dimension to the film, where the film becomes about the relationship between cinema and fascism, the relationship between power, being controlled, being directed, and what it means to be free as an artist, as an actor. You know, what does it mean to act? And the relationship between the freedom of the will and acting are also questions which I think are very interestingly opened up and very powerfully and disturbingly opened up in this film. You know, for instance, in that scene where the night porter comes into her room and she's already sent her husband back away, and she's in a way waiting for Max to come in. Max keeps telling her, tell me what to do, tell me what to do. And this injunction, tell me what to do, is, you know, it implies confession, it implies narration, it implies command, it implies to reveal. It is both an appeal and a command. And films like The Night Porter, or even to a certain extent, say a film like Hitchcock's Vertigo, to me is very interesting because they seem to enact this very problematic relationship between the director and an actor, a relationship that is inevitably gendered and sexed in every sense of the words, gendered and sexed. So yes, I mean, to start the discussion, I thought I would just mention a few of these things. And just before beginning this conversation, I was sort of reading this essay by Theodor Adorno called The Meaning of Working Through the Past. and also the essay that follows it, called Education After Auschwitz, both of which I think were written in the 1960s, 3 years after the film is set. It's set in Vienna in 1957. I don't have the time to actually read these essays with you, but I think it's very interesting to read these two essays by Adorno alongside Cavani's film. And I just want to quickly finish my introduction by reading out to you from Walter Benjamin, Theses on the Philosophy of History. And this is the very famous passage in the Theses where Walter Benjamin is talking about another work of art, Paul Klee's painting Angelus Novus. And this is what Walter Benjamin writes in the Theses on the Philosophy of History. A Klee painting named Angelus Novus shows an angel looking as though he is about to move away from something he is fixedly contemplating. As though he is about to move away from something he is fixedly contemplating. His eyes are staring, his mouth is open, his wings are spread. This is how one pictures the angel of history. His face is turned toward the past. Where we perceive a chain of events, he sees one single catastrophe which keeps piling wreckage upon wreckage and hurls it in front of his feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been smashed. But a storm is blowing from paradise. It has got caught in his wings with such violence that the angel can no longer close them. This storm irresistibly propels him into the future, to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skyward. This storm is what we call progress. I think I'm going to stop my introductory comments here. I've got a whole lot of other kinds of material compiled in my scribbles, but let's open it up for discussion and see what happens in that penumbra around the darkness of the film in conversation with all of you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Aveek. That was a really, to use your word only, fascinating introduction to the film. Anyone would like to begin the discussion with a comment or a question? Yes, Pravina? Yeah.
So, Avik, obviously there are two ways. I think you only framed them by telling us about the interview with Kaviani herself. But there are two critical approaches, let's say. And I was wondering, I suspect yours is the second approach, but one approach is, of course, is to read it as a kind of the fact that she's drawn back into all of this, and that in some ways that last sequence where they're in the room is replicates the concentration camp, and they're starving, etc., etc. And of course, it's the anti-Nazis who are after them, or so-called anti-Nazis now. So either the one critical approach is to see the whole film as a kind of return of repressed history. And the other approach is to see it as more gendered, sexual, a psychological return of a love story of a past. So see it as a private or see it as a public event. And I'm wondering, and I loved your the fascination and fascism kind of conflation. That was really wonderful, and how it casts a spell on the audience. So that would be a way to enter, I guess, a discussion is, are we talking, is your preference for a return of the repressed history, a return of the repressed subjective past, a personal, erotic, sexual, however you want to term determine it is, which one are you kind of leaning towards, and or
You know,
does it
I
matter?
actually
Yeah.
find it very difficult to choose between the two. In fact, I don't think the film allows you to choose between the two. You do have to, in a way, bring the two and keep the two together and keep switching from one to the other. But what interests me very much, Pravina, is that Pravina, isn't it?
Yes,
I'm getting
yes,
your name
yes.
right. Yes. What interests me very much is that the two of them, you know, Dirk Bogarde and Charlotte Rampling, each of whom are bringing into the film a whole history of cinematic role playing and roles that they've played previously. You know, Dirk Bogarde has been in Death in Venice. He's been
Yeah.
in The Damned. He's been in what is the other German in Ludwig in 1973. You know, where again there is this whole question of power and music. So, you know, the two of them are one kind of presence in the film, and the fascist characters are almost another form of representational genre around them, framing them in the film. In fact, they are almost like copybook fascists in the film. You know, this man Klaus with the monocle, or you know, the countess with the blonde hair, and all of them. They are almost like two-dimensional sort of Hollywood fascist characters, almost of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. Whereas even when Charlotte Rampling and Dirk Bogarde, and particularly Dirk Bogarde, puts on his Nazi uniform and they walk out into the streets of Vienna together, he somehow does not, he cannot be totally reduced to this particular kind of highly contextualized characterization. And this is what makes the film so truly disturbing and so, and in a way relatable at so many different levels and dimensions. You know, and I was thinking, you know, just before coming on to this discussion, I was teaching a course on Georges Bataille, for instance, and I was reading the story of the eye, and you know, where again in the film version of the story of the eye there is Charlotte Rampling, and so I find it, the answer to your question, Pravina, is that I find it very difficult to choose between these two, and I almost see Night Porter and the two of them being killed at the end on that bridge, and the use of music and all of that in the tradition that goes back to even something like Tristan and Isolde, or you know, it is like a Liebestod in that sense.
No, perfect. And that's why I think is that's where the power of the film lies, is the ambiguity as to how to understand, particularly Lucia's situation, who seems to, I mean, I think her behavior is what is the primary testimony for your approach, which is that it's consensual on her part. It's something that
Yes.
she cannot, that is a good thing for her, the abandonment, the sexual abandonment, if you like. And I think that in many ways, as I think you only mentioned, that it's hard to delink the two simply. And I think Del Laurentiis's article that I think somebody posted, I think does it quite well, in which he says that fascism was being swept under the rug, and in a sense the fact that they keep going back to that dynamic suggests that they cannot forget history. If you wanted to make it a historical, where history enters our bodies almost ideologically, not and therefore, even though we're telling the story of these characters, what is really being told allegorically at some level is that individuals are not outside of history, and in that sense they are carriers of history, if you wanted to go that route. But I thought she kind of uh, uh, while validating the personal love story more than, and as you said, everything feels like caricatured or background, or the totally um, not real, and that the power of it is the two of them. It's
The
really
two of
very,
them,
very.
I mean, and just the power of the human face,
Yes.
and eyes, and music, and really the way both Dirk Bogarde and Charlotte Rampling acts. And in fact, there is, I'm sure you all know by now, there was this moment when they were shooting the film, and of course the two of them were very close friends by then, and it was Dirk Bogarde who brought Charlotte Rampling to the film. Rampling said, particularly in that hitting and blowing, that very violent scene in Dirk Bogarde's apartment, she said, Liliana, don't make me shoot this over and over again, because he's really hitting me, and this is not acting. There is something that each of us is bringing to this representation, which is in excess of what is required of us as actors, uh, and
Right.
she keeps saying that. And that coexists with the relationship of friendship and trust and love that the two of them have off the sets. In fact, they could not actually bring themselves to that kind of intensity of being who they became on the sets if they could not actually, in an odd way, relax into that with each other. So
Very
there
good.
too, the film kind of enacts this strange paradox of trust and violence,
Surrender is what,
and
yeah.
surrender and abjection and all of these things so compellingly for me. And this is something that I've often discussed with Charlotte, and she still says that it's a film that she's still processing, and it's a film that she would never want to disavow or disown. She would always want to keep it absolutely at the core of her coming into being as an actor. Um, which are quite extraordinary things to say, really. And I think the only other actor who has opened up this kind of terrain of the incalculable and the unlegislatable is perhaps Isabelle. In films like The Piano Teacher or Elle or these films, where they have actually come to embody a kind of thematic within cinema, so that, when Verhoeven calls the film Elle, that pronoun, that female pronoun, it almost refers to the actor herself, rather than to the character within the film. And this way of coming to embody as a real human being the roles that she has played is peculiar to only a very few actors, I think, in the history of cinema. And Charlotte Rampling and Isabelle Huppert, Ingrid Bergman, perhaps, and they all happen to be women, which to me is another I don't know what to say about that, but it's something that I can't help noticing. And women who've been associated with extremely powerful male directors, Hitchcock, Bergman, Visconti, Haneke, Lars von Trier. And so that whole relationship of acting, being made to act, directing, the relationship of power, which is so brilliantly played out in Vertigo, for instance, seems to me to be something that really fascinates me, and how cinema thinks of ways of actually exploring that within its own language and within largely its own visual, musical, sensorial language, rather than a kind of discursive, meta-cinematic, critical language, which is really the realm of the incalculable, and the mysterious. It is really beyond good and evil. And in fact, The Night Porter is part of a trilogy of films that Cavani has made. And the other one in the trilogy is a film on Nietzsche and a kind of triangulated relationship between Nietzsche and Lou Andras Salome, who was, you know, the lover of Rilke, of Freud, and of a whole lot of very notable German, Austrian psychoanalysts, writers, artists, and all of that. And in fact, she calls that film Beyond Good and Evil. And the other one in the trilogy is called The Berlin Affair, which she takes from a story by Junichiro Tanizaki. And I've seen these films together. And in fact, to actually see these three films together is also quite an incredible experience. I'm also thinking of someone like Catherine Deneuve in Belle de Jour, and what she opens up in that film by Louis Buñuel. And if I might just point out also, I was watching The Night Porter today, and it suddenly struck me that if you think of Pina Bausch's Café Müller, you know, just visually in terms of what Bausch herself looks like and what she wears in Café Müller, and the way she uses music in it, and what she's showing, this compulsion to repeat, you know, which takes you beyond the moral, beyond the pathological, towards something truly incalculable in the heart of love itself. And then I looked up the date of Café Müller, and it was 1978, 4 years after Liliana Cavani's film. So I'm almost sure that perhaps you know, Pina Bausch knew Cavani's film, and there is a kind of conversation between Café Müller and The Night Porter, which also interests me very much, because there is dance, there is ballet, there is music in The Night Porter as well, you know, in the figure of I forget his name, you know, where this dancer who's rehearsing Stravinsky. So yes, I mean, this is my very complicated answer to your question.
The lovely insights were the critical versus the visual. I thought that was superbly framed. But also, I think Dolores, I'm not hogging the time. This is my last comment. Is the fact that it's a woman's film. That was a wonderful
yes.
Counter kind of insight
yes.
that she gives, which is that Last Tango in comparison is a man's film to this film, in which Lucia's perhaps
yes.
Lucia's at the center of it, her sensibilities at the center of this.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so
anyone
much.
Anyone would like to come in at this point?
Yes, I've got a little tired of my own voice now. I would like to just step back and listen to all of you.
Yes, would anyone like to come in? I had a question, Aveek.
Yes.
You know, Praveena mentioned two approaches to reading this film. And I was wondering whether Cavani is making an attempt, or rather, you know, making the spectator, inviting the spectator into a reading in which Nazism can be understood in terms of sexual psychopathology, because I mean, you cannot, you know, like, separate the two in the film.
You can't. Yes. It's very interesting, Geeta, because, you know, when the film opened in America, sadomasochism was a term that most critics and adverse critics used. And both Rampling and Cavani said that this was not a vocabulary that they had even thought of. You know, they did not think of it as an S&M kinky film at all. They they were thinking of it in terms of history, and then they were thinking of it in terms of what they repeatedly keep on calling love, you know. So, but of course, one cannot uh, completely take what they say about the film at face value. I mean, you know, as viewers, we can bring our own vocabularies and our own ways of viewing the film to it. And yes, and in fact, in a later interview, Charlotte Rampling does talk, for instance, about the Stockholm syndrome, you know, but she's very keen not to completely reduce the film to a kind of psychoanalytic vocabulary either, you know. Of course, it will come up, and you know, in the way that we talk about the film, or in the way that we write about it or respond to it, we grasp at different kinds of vocabulary. You know, it could be the vocabulary of intellectual history or psychoanalysis or whatever. um, you know, another couple of essays which do not mention this film, but which I actually found very interesting to read alongside this, is the work of the psychoanalytic critic Jacqueline Rose. She has a book on Sylvia Plath called The Haunting of Sylvia Plath. And when I was an undergraduate, she was actually doing the chapters of this book as a series of lectures, and I attended a seminar. And there, in her chapter on Daddy, that famous poem by Sylvia Plath, "Every Woman Loves a Fascist," you know, where there, and she has a very, very powerful and very complex reading of that poem. That chapter in her book on Sylvia Plath, on Daddy, and the way she uses, once again, material from psychoanalysis and case histories. And she refers to this book by Charlotte Berat called The Third Reich of Dreams, which is an anthology of dreams that were dreamt by men and women during the Third Reich, and which Charlotte Berat, who was, I think, a German or a German Jewish woman, had collected and made into this book. And she uses some of these dreams to actually talk about Plath's poem. And the other book is the more recent book by Jacqueline Rose called The Last Resistance, you know, where she points out a kind of dichotomy in the word resistance itself. You know, there is the political sense of resistance, and there is the psychoanalytic sense of resistance. The political sense of resistance is, as it were, the good sense, you know, where you resist fascism. There is the resistance movement. Whereas the psychoanalytic sense of resistance is to refuse to look at something that is staring at you in the face, you know, to refuse to confront things that happen to be part of ourselves. And it is the work of psychoanalysis to actually, to work through the past, is to actually help you overcome these resistances. So these two senses of resistance actually very interestingly pull in two different directions, which in a way links back to Praveena's question about how do we read this film, and your question about how we read this film. Do we read this historically, or do we read this psychoanalytically? I think we have to somehow walk the razor's edge between these two ways of reading the film, and to actually ultimately not take recourse to the discursive and the critical, because the film is continually pulling us towards a terrain that is the terrain of how people look at one another and how people touch one another, you know, all kinds of unspeakable things that are passed between human beings through the gaze, through touch, through even listening to each other, you know. And that in a way is the challenge of films like Salo, or The Night Porter, or Theorem, or The Piano Teacher, or The Autumn Sonata, you know, because they are at one level extremely brutal films, but they fascinate us, in that very problematic sense of fascinate. And
Michael Powell too.
Michael Powell, David Lynch, to some extent, I would say Blue Velvet opens up that kind of terrain as well. And there's a very interesting conversation between Blue Velvet and the piano teacher, I think. Uh, mm, a kind of elusive relationship between the two films. So yeah, I my comments around this film are not at all in any way organized or systematic. Particularly here, these are just stuff that have formed in my head in the course of viewing this film a number of times, and I'm just sort of throwing them at you.
Thank you. Yes, Nikhila, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking after Praveena and your questions, I was thinking more about this relationship between the individual and the collective, and
Yes.
B, between this the psychoanalytical and the historical. I was also wondering how to look at romantic love. I was thinking of a whole host of films in the Indian context, for instance, where romantic love is kind of transcendental of the ideological, of the
Absolutely.
socio-political,
Yes.
also of history itself in some ways. Whereas in a film like this, the brick and mortar of this love virtually is, I mean, it's constituted by the power relations that they find themselves in.
Totally. And you are not allowed any escape from it,
Yeah,
Hmm.
so I mean, so romantic love itself, I mean, what makes it seem, you mentioned, the way in which the film was received in different contexts, the way it was looked at as perversion and so on. So if one asks what in it could seem like, perversion or whatever, it seems like because it does not fit into our notion of this kind of transcendental love, or that the notion of love here is kind of seeped in relations of power, seeped in abasement, seeped in a kind of ambiguity, also this sense of loss and gain in trust. When, for instance, when she comes back and Max enters the room, his first response is she going to betray him? And that's what I thought while I was watching the film too, that she has come back to testify, and then it takes a very different kind of a turn, and gives us this sense of revisiting an old wound, and for the kind of pleasures of kind of scratching on that wound, and
Yes.
so there are
Yes,
all those,
absolutely.
yeah, so there are
All
all
those
those,
things.
yeah, dimensions to it. Also, I was thinking after watching one of the videos that you had suggested about our contemporary compulsions to visit the past, collect as a collective, what is it that makes us, let's say, go back to traumatic moments like this, or like partition or whatever. So what is it that makes us go back to such moments? And I thought that one of the videos that you had suggested to us, I think it's a lecture in New York University, or the introduction to the film in New York University, was particularly perceptive in that regard. One last point about the film, and this is more to more to do with something that we haven't spoken so far, and this is the kind of frames that the filmmaker seems to adopt here. For instance, there are moments where we feel that the close-up is, I mean, it's cutting, so many, cutting the frame in such a way that many of the details go missing. And so we hanker after, so what is it? What is just outside this frame? So it looks like there is a particular method or technique where you would expect a mid shot, there is a close up, where you would expect a, kind of a long shot, there is a close up or a close mid shot. So I thought the framing of the two, particularly in that cramped apartment, the way the frames themselves kind of close them in, I thought was very interesting for me in the film. Thank you.
Yes, Nikhila, and also if you compare the way the faces of women are framed in this film with the documentary on women in the resistance, there again, they are speaking and the camera moves very close to their faces, and they're saying something about their experience in the camps, how they were trying to make these strips of cloth out of their shifts and plugging their ears and all of that. But the face has its own language, which, and of course, it's also interesting that Kavani does not include the testimony of these two women that she actually talks about outside that documentary, and she actually uses that testimony to make this film. So there is a kind of complementary or supplementary relationship between the documentary sensibility and politics of Kavani's filmmaking and the feature film, the more imaginative, and the word imagination keeps coming up. The Countess says that you don't have imagination, or that again for me is a very interesting theme that is running through so many of these films. Yes, you're absolutely right about that.
I think there's a way to, sorry, can I interject?
Of course, yes.
So Nikhil's first point was this transcendental romantic love in Indian cinema. But I think the point of this is to transcend it through sex, not through the spirituality of sorts comes because of this extreme sense of union, however you want to, but through the body, through the senses and through the body, you are no longer Max and what's her name again?
Lucia.
Lucia. You're not Max and Lucia anymore at the end of that. That's certainly the 2-3 really strong moments. So transcendence through material love, I think, would be the answer. Through sex and through suffering. I don't, when you get so physical, there is a part, you do go beyond good and evil in that sense. Two, I think Nikhila said, what is it that causes them to keep going back? It's clearly the repetition compulsion that Freud talked about, right? That you're
beyond the pleasure principle, yes.
Yeah, you're supposed to repeat it. And the framing for me, that you mentioned, at least there are moments in which she enters the hallway for the first time. He sees her for the first time behind the reception counter or whatever. And there are moments in which they're both kind of marginal figures. And I think those are the moments of history. You can see the impingement, let's say, of history, society, culture, the relationship in which these two are carrying out their very personal agendas, or which they are a symptom of. If you were a historicist, you would say they're a symptom of history, that there's nobody that's outside of history in that sense. So anyway. That was nice.
And you know, the other thing, you know, the way cinema works with these very telling details, you will see that, you know, we were talking about close-ups and framings. You know, when you look at Charlotte Rampling from the back, the camera often moves very close to the way she ties her hair, that top knot with
Yes.
that spiral, which is the Hitchcock hairdo, you know,
Vertigo, yeah. The
which is the
vertigo.
vertigo hairdo, and which Haneke also uses at the end of The Piano Teacher, you know, quite deliberately. And I think there is a kind of genealogy there, you know, through the spiral of her hair,
Right.
you know, which is vertigo, then night porter, piano teacher, the French role, you know, and again, you know, you can't sort of read it symbolically. It is a detail. It is, you know, what Roland Barthes calls a punctum. You know,
Yeah.
it resists critical discursive
Right.
interpretation,
No,
and
I'm
yet you
totally
notice
agree. Yeah.
it, you know, and to Nikhila, what you were saying about romantic love, actually that word romantic is used in the film, you know, just before the cabaret scene, you know, when that song is sung by Charlotte Rampling. um, um, Max is talking to the Countess and he says, this is not a romantic story, it's a biblical story. And there I think uh, I've read the script of The Night Porter. The first romantic is with a lowercase r. The second romantic is with an uppercase R. And already with the uppercase R, you're entering history and romantic love, as in German Romanticism, 19th century, you know, all of that. And then, of course, the biblical story of Salome, you know, which is framed around the cabaret scene of the decapitated soldier. So I think this whole question of putting putting the transcendent energies of romantic love to question by bringing it back to the materiality of the human body and history and sexuality is something that the film is again very deeply aware of. And the individual and the collective thing is also to do partly with cinema as well. No, I mean, because if you're sitting in the dark in a hall, watching The Night Porter, which is about creating this darkness in rooms, in houses, you know, creating a kind of night around you in which these images can be savored, as it were. And now, of course, most of us would be watching the film alone, individually, in our own private spaces. But to actually watch it with other people in the dark, in the cinema, uh, takes you into the collectivity of this whole experience of sexuality, of eros, in a way that is very, very powerful and disconcerting. You know, I've watched this film in the Everyman Theatre in London, and there is a very strange kind of energy in the cinema in the dark when people are actually sitting very close to one another watching a film like this, which is somehow lost when we are watching it on our laptops, you know, sitting in our bedrooms or in our studies.
Yeah, would anyone else like to come in at this point?
I just wanted to say, in case somebody wants to see something, I don't know if Avik has seen, but Babylon Berlin, the series on Netflix, or I think
Ah,
it's in,
yes, yes, of
it's
course.
a very
Mm,
strong Weimar Germany, and it has
mm.
many of these same issues, but it's contemporary. It's excellent visually. It's an excellent production.
Yes, yes, I haven't watched it yet. And of course, the films of Fassbinder, you know, I
Yeah,
haven't talked about Fassbinder at all. You know, even a film like The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant or Querelle de Brest, you know, where again it is so difficult to take an unambiguous moral position vis-a-vis the erotic subject matter of the film, of what you are actually pulled into by the film. And that is what is truly disturbing and ambiguous about these films. And that is what really rattled the censors. In fact, there's this very funny moment in the Liliana Cavani interview where she says that, I went to the censors and asked them, what is it that you have against this film? And they said, oh, what we don't like is the fact that the woman is on top in that sex scene. And she said, well, these things happen. and she laughs and says that of all the little details of action in the film, the censors picked on that particular thing, that Charlotte Rampling is on top of Dirk Bogarde in that scene, and the censors object to that, which is an interesting little detail that she throws at you in that interview.
Anyone else? Yes. What happened? No one wants to say anything about. Yeah, Kalpalata, please go ahead.
I would like to say something about what Charlotte Rampling says in her interview. It is a love story between the torturer and. But however hard I tried, I was not very convinced about this love story, because this girl goes through a very painful experience, and so I thought that is it even possible to understand love, and it is, according to me, it is not the erotica, the sexual relation also develops because of, I think, psychopathology rather than a feeling of love. And later she is reminded of the same physical relation rather than any kind of feeling of love as such, because really, for me, it is, she has gone through such a painful experience, and it was that does she even understand what love is? That is my whole curiosity about this film was.
I mean, I'd rather the rest of you discussed this, because it can actually turn into a kind of semantic discussion then, what is the meaning of love, and which is a perfectly interesting discussion to have around a film like this. But I'd rather not. I'd rather leave it to you to talk about this among yourselves. I've already actually said quite a bit. So, I mean,
I can just say one thing. I'm sorry, Kalpalata, right? I think the aid to remember that on her part, it was very consensual, even in the early stages. So Lucia, if you wanted to give it a positive spin in towards something positive, whether we call it love or whatever, I mean, I would agree with Aveek that these terminologies like love, etc., just predispose us towards thinking of love as sacrifice, or I think we should just stay away from.
Or even
they tend to be
equality or freedom or.
Right. And so I think that, I mean, the one response I would have to Kalpalata is the fact that it was consensual. There were a lot of places she could have opted out and she didn't. So the only thing that I think that the film is asserting is the real power of whatever this experience is, the power and I think that's what we're misrepresenting as love perhaps, but I think it's just very powerful. She's discovered something within herself. And as you said, it was, and the second point I wanted to, you did mention that it was kind of forced on her, which is true, but that also gave her The second thing I wanted to mention is that the connectivity that I see is that any sex, not quote unquote Nazi sex or perverse sex or whatever, any sexual thing has this element of violence and power to it. You know, so it's not that it's totally about Nazism and sadomasochism. That's also too, I think, trivial a way of.
I think that would make it too easy in a way, and in fact, that is, in a way, what the film is both asking you to do or offering up to you, but also denying you.
Yes.
There is a kind of film within a film in this, which is so difficult in a way. I'm even thinking of something like Roland Barthes' The Lover's Discourse, you know, and the kind of terrain opened up there, or even. You know, I was watching this, again, a 1974 or 73 film by Mrinal Sen called Podatik, you know, with Simi Garewal and Dhritiman Chatterjee in it, where Dhritiman Chatterjee is a runaway Naxalite who takes shelter in Simi's apartment. And there is a kind of relationship between them, which to me is, it opens up, though it doesn't push it far enough, this kind of terrain that Cavani opens up, you know, which is happening over and over again in the 60s and the 70s, particularly in cinema and in fiction, I think. And in theory, I mean, if you read somebody like Bataille or Foucault or Barthes, you know, this whole question of love is taken and then unraveled, and the theater of love, as it were, then becomes something so incalculably complicated and complex, and which Freud is doing too, and Freud is working it back to the Greeks, you know, the Greek tragedy, to Sophocles and to the other Greek, to Aeschylus, you know, and calling it the family romance, you know. So over and over again, psychoanalysts, political theorists have used literature, drama, theater, cinema to open up this terrain, so that cinema, in it, there is something about these representational modes which is not available to a more unequivocally politicized or polarized discursive mode, which is why we go to literature, which is why we go to art, and which is why we want to keep literature and art and cinema out of the hands of the censors, and which is why the censors want to, you know, fight this kind of tug of war with us over it, simply because we are in the realm of the unlegislatable, you know, and what is pathological and what is, in fact, I think Lucia says that there is no cure, you know, and Max says at one point, sanity, insanity, who is to judge, you know. I think
Foucault, actually.
Absolutely, yes, exactly, and these are questions and unresolvable things absolutely at the heart of art and literature and cinema and any creative product, as it were. And I think when we want to protect art from, say, fascism, we want to protect particularly the ability to be able to contemplate and confront and represent these things, and even to perhaps understand them in this particular kind of theater, you know.
So Kalpalata, I don't know if anyone answered you, but I think what to sum that query up, I think the idea is that any critical language tends to co-opt the experience,
Hmm.
take away from the experience, so turn it into something very cliched. And so what I think Aveek is arguing is that cinema in particular perhaps has this ability to get away from uh, political language, get away from cliche. It's lost its currency, as Nietzsche would say. You know, these words like love, etc., have lost their uh, the exchange value. We get
Hmm.
nothing out of it. So, is to experience more sensually and to experience into the realm of the unknown without naming it. But at the same time, when we talk about it, we can't help using those concepts, you know, and
Absolutely.
so
And we
we get
also
tied
can't
up
help,
with.
and we can't help feeling deeply and profoundly uneasy or discomfited by all of this. And my answer to that would be, well, so be it. You know, I'd rather be discomfited than be served up a kind of sanitized and um, end-stopped version of the depths of human experience. Um, yes, I'm also thinking of a film like Hiroshima Mon Amour, Alain Resnais's film with, again, the screenplay is by a woman. And when Resnais was asked to make a film on Hiroshima, he said, I'm not going to make a documentary film. I want to make a feature film, and I will make it only if Marguerite Duras writes the screenplay. And it's a wonderful collaboration between Resnais and Duras. And there again, you know, it is a relationship between uh, uh, a German soldier and a French woman, you know, who is then played by Emmanuelle Riva, who then plays the old woman in Haneke's Amour. And again, there's a lot of cinematic Hall of Mirrors stuff going on across these films, which to me is a fascinating thing that happens around these films. And I think in the post-war generation, you know, from the 50s into the 60s and the 70s, something has been opened up by the experience of the war, you know, and by the experience of fascism, of power, and then endorsed by 1968. In fact, one of Avani's films, The Cannibals, is about 1968, the Students' Revolt, which very powerfully goes into cinema. Um, um, and and cinema becomes a terrain in which, almost like a laboratory in which to actually confront these things without having to make up one's mind and without having to either diagnose or cure, you know. Which is why the language of psychoanalysis keeps coming up, but comes up as a kind of en passe, you know, in the films.
And I think the I mean, given what you just said, I think it's impossible not to understand. And by the questions that both Nikhila and Kalpalata mentioned, I think it's impossible not to see a role of history, because we keep talking about World War II and fascism, and so there is and then it produces the ideological, emotional values that we see in the films on a personal level. So I think those questions, and I face this when I teach American film a lot, you know, and when I try and teach American cinema in India, I mean, a lot of it is lost because some of it is lost, at least because it feels too, you know, a Tarantino film feels too facetious within the Indian context, you know, it feels too trivial or whatever in the Indian context. So I think there is a way in which you can see all of what we're discussing, also in not in a very literal way about politics or anything like that, but also sort of grounded in some kind of, you know, historical moment, let's put it that way.
And also not just one historical moment. I mean, think of some of the novels of James Baldwin, for instance, If Beale Street Could Talk, or another country, where racial, miscegenated erotic relationships are
Yes.
talked about, or the novels of Jean Genet, even the films of Jean Genet. I was just reading The Thief's Journal, and also teaching it a little bit. And this is, and think of love jihad, for instance. This, what is happening to sectarian thinking and the questions of sexuality there. Who is protecting whom from what? And what is being redefined and re-legislated as pathological and permissible or not, and what is happening in the name of morality and honor, in honor killings, or relations between fathers and daughters, for instance. So the psychopathology of everyday life, to borrow a phrase from Freud, is bottomless and endless, and is not confined just to the Third Reich. And in fact, that is what Adorno is saying in these two essays about working through the past and education after Auschwitz, that it is too easy.
Tarkeshwar has unmuted. Please go ahead, Tarkeshwar.
Yes, yes.
Sorry to come in at this stage when the discussion is moved. Not only the discussion is moving away from this film that we have seen this week. There was reference to a lot of other films and the theoreticians, both post Second World War as well as post 1968. Just coming back to the film, I think the point that you mentioned about the Greek tragedy, when I watched the film, I thought it's a Greek tragedy. So
yes, it is a tragic film. Yes,
what
absolutely.
why this film is fascinating is because it's a tragedy. So it is, but it is also boring because there's some flaw there. There's something that we can't accept easily. So there is in the beginning, it started as a narrative about the post-Nazi Germany, what is happening there, how they're trying to deal with the Nazi past, and the murkier things that is happening in the name of inquiry and things like that. And the protagonist is ready to go to the extent of killing somebody else to save himself.
Yes.
So this is the first part. But once, and he's afraid that Lucia might have come to take revenge on him. And then once we come to know about their past sexual relationship, whether it's consensual or not, we can discuss about it. But once that relationship comes into the picture, then the story takes a different turn. The person who is ready to kill others to save himself now walks into his death. He knows the problem of being with that lady. Everybody among his friend circle is advising him against it, asking him to turn her to the police or leave her, but he goes on living with her. So he knows the consequences, but still walks into it.
Tarakesha, there's just one little thing I want to clarify here, is that the trial and the handing over of the witness is not to the anti-Nazi faction. It is to the Nazis.
Nazi
It's
why I
the
said it's
Nazis
murkier.
themselves. Yes, exactly.
That's why I said it's a murkier thing.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
The focus that I was trying to say is that this narrative is fascinating because it is tragic. But the problems that we have with Greek tragedy exist here too. See, the death of a witness doesn't bother us. but death of this Max bothers us because he knows he
Yes.
has a lot of avenues to escape from it, but he still is walking into it because of that
Yes.
one flaw, that one weakness that he has. So in that sense, our attention goes towards him, not even
Yes.
towards her, because
Yes.
she is only a kind of foil for him to attain that tragic herohood.
Hmm. Hmm.
Though we might say that it is consensuous, she is willing and things like that, but at what circumstances she is willing, or is it she is playing along when she
It's
is caught with it?
impossible to say, really.
Those are the
Hmm.
different issues. But she only
Hmm.
comes as a foil for him to achieve that tragic end. So
Hmm.
the focus is on the antagonist, and that's why the people who have objected to this or had problems with this film could be because of this uh, uh, the way the film is structured, where he becomes the tragic hero, and somehow our sympathy turns towards him in spite of the other things that are there to judge that character. So
Hmm.
somehow the narrative ends up making us have a sympathy for this protagonist. So
Yes.
forgetting about other things. So the objections to this film might have stemmed from that fact. So I'm
Hmm.
only simply trying. I'm not judging the film. I'm only
Hmm.
trying to understand why the
Yes.
objections might have come to the film.
Yes. Yes. Because of the way we are made almost complicit with what, at a rational level, we would not be complicit with in the film.
Yeah.
Yeah, Arun would, I think
Yeah,
Arun, yeah,
yeah, yeah,
Arun,
yeah.
go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, Aveek, I'm really glad that you suggested this film. This is an absolute favorite of mine.
Ah,
So
okay.
yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. Uh, and I think already so much has been said about the film, so I will not go on repeating. But I wanted, I was wondering about more about the reception of the film. Like recently,
Yes.
was said, the amount of flack that the film received. So, even somebody like Roger Ebert,
Yeah,
who is
yeah.
a fan
Said
of
that this is
Ras Myers and all,
trash or something.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, something
Hmm.
like that, you
Hmm.
know. So that was, generally I agree with Roger Ebert. So this was something contentious. So, so I was thinking about the time during which the film came out, the 70s, mid 70s. And
74,
yeah,
73,
74,
74. Hmm.
74,
Hmm.
and in 75, Salo came. So,
Hmm.
70s and 80s were the golden age of Italian exploitation films, right? So, all these different cannibal exploitation, Nazi exploitation, everything was coming out during that time,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
Mario Bava was there, Joe
Yes.
D'Amato was there, Diodato was there, Cannibal
Yes.
Holocaust.
Yes.
So I was thinking, maybe was this film compartmentalized into that genre by certain critics, just because
Hmm.
of the amount of perceived perversion in it, and
Hmm.
maybe I thought there was a certain bias because I saw this film in a couple of lists which was meant for exploitation films.
Ah, I see.
Yeah,
Yes.
see, that was kind of problematic for me.
Hmm. Also, if you look at the, where the objection to the film is coming from,
Yeah.
it got flack. Most of the flack is in America. And in fact, Liliana Kafani says in a very funny way, "Oh, the Americans are not educated enough to to take a film like this. In Europe, it got a much better reception."
Yeah.
And
Americans are a funny folk. They used to watch Bergman's films for the, pardon my
mm,
language, big breasts.
mm,
There was a lot of discussion about, the uh, sexually liberated Swedish people and all that in America. There was even a porn film called a Swedish Love Story, something like that. That was a
Yes,
parody
yes.
of Bergman's film.
But, Scenes from a Marriage,
Scenes
I
from a
think.
Marriage. Yeah,
Yes,
right.
yes.
Yeah. So it's funny. And also another thing is about the romantic aspect of the film. So Kalplada ma'am said something about it being hard to digest as a romantic film. So I was thinking, I'm glad that you mentioned Bataille again. So in the foreword of Eroticism, Bataille says that, what was it? Yeah, man goes constantly in fear of himself. His erotic
Yes.
urges terrify him. So for me, I thought that this film is a film about love without fears.
Yes, yes.
Film, a romance free of the constraints of bourgeois morality. And obviously, that is something that will feel like an assault on bourgeois aesthetics and all that. So, it's.
And in fact, people keep talking about being afraid in this film.
Mm,
And both within the film and the actors say that because they were so, because Dirk Bogarde and Charlotte Rampling knew each other so well, they
yeah,
could actually be fearless with each other,
yeah, yeah.
in bringing
I
out this kind of violence.
Yeah, I saw
in the
that
acting.
interview, that extra featurette with which came out with Criterion. So, like you mentioned, she says that she was getting punched for real, and like she was
Yeah.
really she was upset with
She
that.
said she can't take it anymore.
Yeah, so like, so I didn't know how to react to that. Maybe is it something? It's obviously something very serious, but I think maybe they were okay with it. I don't know.
Well, she certainly was,
Okay.
and she's never distanced herself critically from the film. In fact, she's kept claiming it for herself and saying that this is an important film. It needed to be made, even if it disturbed people, even if it created a huge amount of unresolvable controversy. It's a film that I'm glad I made. And she said that it was almost like a calling in her
Yeah.
case to make this
Yeah.
film. And she insisted on showing it last year in Berlin when she
Yeah.
went to get the honorary Golden Bear. And in
Yeah.
Berlin, of all places.
Yeah.
So she never disavowed this film. Never.
I also wanted to mention about Hiroshima Mon Amour, but you
Mon
beat me
Amour,
to it.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So and I really liked that you used the word collaboration for the for the project which brought together Duras and
Duras
Resnais.
and Resnais,
So
yes.
the collaboration, when we hear collaboration in Nazi context, we obviously will head towards collaboration horizontale, that horizontal
Yes.
collaboration, right? Yeah. So that was
All
also.
these words, collaboration, then
Yeah.
resistance,
Yeah.
they're very interesting words because they straddle politics and art in very ambiguous ways, And I was also thinking, when I was watching The Night Porter, I was thinking of this whole subgenre of the films set in hotels. The Night Porter, Shining, last year in Marienbad,
Yes.
Hiroshima Mon Amour. What are these hotels? What kind of spaces and places are these hotels? In which these unspeakable things happen. And which are haunted, in every sense of the word, by history, by ghosts, by past, by all kinds of things. So there is the kind of the hotel film genre, which would be interesting to actually think about as a setting.
Budapest Grand Hotel also, no? Budapest.
Yes.
Grand,
Yes.
Sanjay had raised his hand. Sanjay, please go ahead.
Yeah, starting from the discussion on tragedy, as Tarakeshwar was telling about. like who's dying is a tragic event, and who that is decided in the place. So for example, in Hamlet, when Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, they are killed, so that's not supposed to be tragic, but yeah. And because of that, later on, Tom Stoppard had to write the play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead.
Guildenstern are dead. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And in
So
Hamlet, almost everybody dies. Really.
yeah.
Nobody's left alive, really.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So what is very disturbing at the same time is that these people, all the friends of Max, they still continue meeting, and at one point of time they also salute in the typical Nazi way,
They do
and
the Nazi salute.
they have been meeting regularly, and trying to help each other in eliminating evidences. And as it was already mentioned, that Max also kills one witness. But otherwise, only Max has some kind of, or it is supposed to be having a kind of guilt complex. And he says at one time that he prefers to remain in the dark rather than coming in the light, because of his guilt feeling. But otherwise these people, they not only survived, and they still they have the Nazi ideology even after the World War II. They are still harboring these kinds of feelings. And it is interesting to contextualize is that after World War II, all the Allied powers, they wanted to have a kind of denazification in Germany or in Austria, whereas in West Germany was supposed to be ally of the US and Britain, and they wanted to keep West Germany as in their camp against the Soviet Union, so that they could fight with the enemy of communism and the Soviet Union. So because of that, this the denazification was not very successful in the West Germany as well as in Austria. So when the film starts, it says Vienna 1957. And you see the emergence of the far right in Vienna, which continues till today.
Yes.
For me, this part is disturbing, that that these people still, they are not ashamed of their acts, and they are meeting regularly, they are destroying evidences, they are killing witnesses, and this tendency keeps on growing, as you can see the emergence of the far right everywhere in Europe particularly. So I mean, this aspect is not very much at the center of debate in the film, but that is at the same time, I feel, a very important aspect of the film.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, you're absolutely right. And in fact, it's very important in the film, I think, that Lucia is not Jewish. She is the daughter of a socialist.
Yes, she is the daughter of socialists. That's problematic for them, because there were a lot of communists who participated in the resistance movement. And it happened in Italy also. A lot of women participated, and that was also shown in the documentary.
Yes, we've got a comment from Funny Raj about a series of Indian films which we've not gone into at all, and I think it's actually very interesting to actually think of the films that you've mentioned, Faniraj. Do you want to talk a little bit, Faniraj, about this? What you've written in the comment section. You've talked about Benegal. You've talked about Ankur Nishant. Where of course the political structure and the context is very different, and yet some of the structures of feeling that are being explored in these films can be seen as homologous.
Paniraj, would you like to elaborate on the comment you have made in the chat box?
No. I just wanted to bring it to the Indian situation. How you could understand, say, if I fled my make and Hatras, and that Ghani would have survived and lived the life and encountered those guys. How do you understand? I mean, thematically, the cinema is universal, language is universal, and what Aveek is talking about. I'm also fascinated about, like, quote unquote, racism. But sexual encounters, can they be having this? I mean, if you say that it is critical, let me be in the critical discourse mode. You can say, in a context like Chola, where people are, I mean, people who watch Chola were disturbed, saying that how she can do it, that can kill her lover and can love her raper. And in Ankur and Nishant also points towards that, and this is the question of critical, that is hegemony of our social context of power, and women submitting for her well-being, her existence for the power. But that this film's context is entirely different, and if I am saying universal, can I bring it culturally and historically to all times and all levels? That I mean, simply it's a point of discussion. The film Ankur, you see that
Yes,
in Nishant
yes.
you can see it, and Chola brings it not only in Chola, yes, also he brings it very critically. But how do you bring the sexuality and the masculinity?
I was also thinking of a film like Makbul, the relationship between,
Now, Makbul is at least having Makbul is at least having a Shakespearean background of power.
But
Contextualizing.
it's
And
translated into a very different kind of historical situation.
right, I
And
mean, that's what I'm saying. It transcends the historical situations and relations of power. And if you say that if you either Adorian or Freudian kind of sexuality can be discussed universally, can it be transcending the time and culture? I mean, that's the question what everybody is asking in every other historical situation.
I don't know. I am usually quite skeptical about universalizing particularities of forms of oppression. For instance, I think it is very important to understand the particular forms that feudalism or patriarchy takes in the context of caste, for instance, or even relationships between the genders in, say, a country like India, you know, and it's very important to keep that in mind in a very concrete historical way while talking about it. But then from the particular and the concrete, one can also move on to a kind of more radical, if not universal, question about the nature of art itself, that why does tragedy give us pleasure? you know what kind of judgment do works of art ask of us, and how is that different from the other acts of judgment, say in a court of law, or in more real social situations? So what is this thing called art, in which we become slightly different subjects and objects, and have to exercise and rethink this whole problem of passing judgments in a very different way, you know.
We can understand that, but what I'm saying is, say, you take a film like Dahan, where Rituparno passionately,
yes, yes,
Rituparno doesn't judge like that. But when
yes.
you want to take a stand on Indian situation on a rape question, it comes to a morality not at the right wing level. It comes to a morality where left also should understand something else. I mean,
Yes.
what I'm saying is, I'm not saying what all you have said has to be critically looked into, and we should not judge only by critical faculties, and we should go beyond it. Yeah, I agree, but when we discuss the film, okay, in this group, as a film study group, judging it deeply about the cinematics and the art of cinema, and even if I can show to my audience in somewhere in local Karnataka, Perverse Guide to Cinema, people say what you are talking about cinema. Right? I mean, I'm not saying that, but at a level where, I mean, I think Nishant and Ankur speak at a different level. Chola speaks at a different level. I mean, this theme is relevant, but somewhere in discussing in different contexts has to be contextualized. At that point, what you said, the critical rational mode is beyond. I mean, doesn't do justice to this kind of film. Yeah, in this film's context, it may not do justice, but I cannot transport it to some other context like Nishant,
No,
Ankur, or
no,
Chola.
no,
Yeah, I
no.
mean, and that's what the particularities I wanted to
Yes.
intervene on.
No,
If
I
you are
agree
so
with you.
passionate about the
Yes.
film, I can agree with it, and I will also be passionate about the films I like. But somebody will pull us saying that what about this and what about that? I'm just trying to pull that. That's all. Contradicting. Yeah. And I don't want to also be straight jacketing into a morality of something kind of like that. Yeah, we should look into these aspects and that particular film. What we talked of. I mean, there are a lot of films, jet films on post-Nazi horrors. I mean, sexual horror. There are a host of films which I don't remember now, which have come post 2015, which are very are in the gray zone. Yeah, of course, of love and hate. Yeah, but that should be understood. But while discussing Indian films also, while communicating with the Indian audience, even the informed film audience of the Indian, we contextualize it. I think we may understand this particular kind of whatever you say, transcendental cinematic experiences better. I agree with your transcendental cinematic experiences, and I loved your way you related piano teacher, night porter, and vertigo.
Actually, I wouldn't describe my position as a transcendental position at all, in fact. Transcendent in the sense that, I mean, it's just, I would think a little bit before using the word because I'm not quite sure how to deal with something that calls itself transcendent. Is anything really transcendent? Is it possible for us to transcend our moment, our persons, our situations? But then I don't also want to quibble on words, you know. I know the sense in which you're using the word transcendent, and there I completely agree with you. And also for me, a film like Night Porter, ultimately, you know, when I watch it and when I'm actually today, when I'm presenting it to you or opening up the discussion with you, I'm not here as a kind of film studies person, which I'm not in a way. I'm actually much more interested in the Night Porter because I'm interested in the complexity of human experience, you know. And of course,
no,
if
I never want you to straitjacket into these things. I brought these points into the discussion. I never wanted your presentation to be straitjacketed to something else. No, sorry.
No, but I think it's good to sometimes think in very concrete terms as well, because
That's what I wanted to bring in. That's all. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, and I can't agree more with you, Fanny Raj. You know, if I'm talking about, I don't know. I mean, one can give endless number of examples for that. But what is it that we are doing when we are talking about a film, you know, even when what we are talking about is not just a film, but a set of human experiences and relationships. That too is something I'm interested to think through, but I have no resolutions to offer. you know, to
No,
the
I perfectly
problematic.
understand. No, I'm not
You
contradicting
know.
you. I just wanted to pose these questions to put it
Yes,
in
and
a
I think these are
broader
really questions and problems. You know, this whole question of unease and the relationship between pleasure and unease,
yeah.
and what remains and must remain unresolvable in experiences like this.
No,
That
I'm not sure whether you have seen one particular film which is very mainstream popular. I don't remember that film, but that was quite a hit in Tamil. Charan Raj played the role. I mean,
which
sorry,
one? Which
sorry,
one?
going back.
Which one?
I don't remember that. That's a 1980s film
Okay.
where Charan Raj, who is a subaltern, who is uh, who is subjected to cruelty by a rich father, enters into the marriage where a rich father's daughter is getting married, and he takes that bride and rapes her. Right then onwards, the film that woman resolves to go with in the milieu of that subaltern male and goes and resides with him, wins his heart and marries him. I mean, there was a kind of a very popular film, Tamil film. I don't remember that name. That was
No, I
released
don't think I've
also
seen this. I don't think
no,
I've
no,
seen
no, no.
this.
This kind of themes of this sexual relation. I mean, one what we say like that was a very kind of a broad sense where a subaltern guy goes and rapes a rich man's daughter on the eve of the marriage, takes the bride, rapes her, and marriage starts, and that woman goes to come back and live with him, lives in his subaltern setup, wins all the hearts of the people, and marries that guy and becomes that guy. I mean, this theme also filters into the popular films.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. And also how we respond to a situation like this depends very much on the register of cinema that we confront as well. No?
That's what also I was thinking about. Yeah, because I mean, these are not only a kind of a theme which could be discussed in Nazi situation or somewhere else, and of course it comes back in the Hong filmmaker again and again. I keep forgetting. Pankar Wai. Pankar Wai's film subtly deals with this kind of
yes,
sexual
yes,
transgressions and understanding of sexual transgression. Yeah,
yes,
I very much understand that. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Does anyone else have anything to say? Anyone would like to ask a question or make a comment? Okay, in that case, then thank you very much, Aveek. It's been a very wonderful session that we are coming to a close to.
Thank you, Geeta. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me to come and present this film, which I always find very, very difficult to teach or present or whatever. But then that difficulty is part of the pleasure of the film. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Aveek, for the film and the discussion.
Thank you all very much. And once again, Happy New Year to everybody.
Yes, yes, to all of you too. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night. Goodbye.